right past the back of my head. It was wrapped in asbestos. Never thought a thing about it.
There was no such thing as the right to know the chemicals you were using, the compounds you were using back at that time. Everything had a number and a formula, and you didn't know what it was.
I hope I live to see my boy graduate, you know. Just, it bothers you, you know, you can't help it.
These three men don't know each other. One lives in California, one lives in Pennsylvania, and one lives here in Oklahoma. But they all have something in common. They may all be dying from exposure to asbestos, an exposure that began when they were young, healthy tire workers. Clarence Spencer is 59 years old. He's lived in the Miami area all his life. He began working at the B.F. Goodrich tire plant in 1955. He intended to be a Goodrich retiree, but his plans changed when the plant closed. Now he is unemployed and his health is deteriorating. He's joining the National Tire Workers Litigation Project, a project that is alerting potential victims of the nation's rubber industry, victims of exposure to asbestos and chemicals. The litigation project began here in Century City, California. Up until a few months ago, the project was exclusively for California tire plant workers. Now, tire workers nationwide are finding that they too have been exposed to asbestos and chemicals that are threatening their lives. The project is the brainchild of Gordon Stemple, a self-styled specialist in toxic law. Stemple believes many tire workers share more than occupational skills.
There is a large population of people out there who are very sick, either with cancers, be it caused by asbestos or something else. There appears to be a lot of birth defects amongst the family members, a good deal of multi-sided tumors, brain tumors, bladder cancers, and these things scream out for answers.
A group of former Firestone workers in Salinas, California were the first tested. When the project's doctors screened the workers for lung cancer, they found a surprisingly high incidence of asbestos-related disease. Asbestos is used in the plants to insulate pipes and in a powder form known as talc or soapstone. Workers would dip rubber in soapstone to keep it from sticking together. What the workers didn't realize is that soapstone has large amounts of asbestos in it. Stemple says he has evidence that shows that at least 10 years ago, the tire industry knew it was exposing employees to asbestos.
Clearly, most of them knew that asbestos is found in talc and soapstone, yet they really did nothing about it, and in some cases they assured their employees that there was nothing to worry about.
When Firestone and Goodrich officials were asked to respond to our questions regarding possible asbestos-related diseases among tire workers, their comments ranged from skepticism of Stemple's test results to no comment. Both insisted, however, they were careful with their employees' health. Stemple says some tire workers were inhaling 2 to 3 million asbestos fibers a day. And when asbestos is inhaled, it becomes trapped in the lungs. Some of the fibers make their way to the lining of the lung, causing pleural thickening. Others become lodged in the lower part of the lungs, causing the delicate tissue to scar and the lungs to harden and shrink. Dr. Clara Gelbart, a pulmonary lung specialist and a consultant to Stemple, is trained to look for signs of asbestos contamination.
The longer they have been exposed to, the sicker they are.
Sick enough to where their lifespans are going to be cut by a number of years?
I would say so, yes.
The names of the contaminated workers are in a computer expected to process statistics of more than 100,000 tire workers likely to file lawsuits. Those workers belong to 30 rubber unions already committed to the project. 30 more are expected by the end of July.
The ultimate goal, of course, is to get these people some compensation for the damage that's been done to them, both by way of bringing workers' compensation claims in those cases where people are severely enough impaired to be able to get anything from workers' compensation, and in the local jurisdictions also commencing lawsuits against the manufacturers and distributors of asbestos to that particular plant.
Former employees of a Firestone tire plant in Pennsylvania are sure they've risked their health and their futures. We'll have their story tomorrow. Mary Grady, Channel. Nestled here in Pennsylvania Dutch country is a closed Firestone tire plant. At one time, this facility employed nearly 3,000 people, men and women who worked with and around asbestos, talc, soapstone, carbon black, benzene, and more. Today, though, there's a fear that those materials and those chemicals could rob the workers of their golden years. Some of the former workers are lined up outside their union hall waiting to enter this mobile exam unit for lung x-rays and a pulmonary function test. The van was purchased and equipped by Gordon Stemple, a California attorney who specializes in toxic law. The van is making its way around the country screening current and former workers of the tire industry. The Pottstown local joined the Tire Workers Litigation project after its president, Ron Squibb, met with Stemple.
With the stories that we were hearing of the places that were being tested and how high the percentage was of those being positive with an asbestos-related disease, that we wanted to find out exactly what was happening in Pottstown.
Take a breath in for me now.
Jay Opplinger is just one of the 600 workers here being screened. He began working for Firestone in 1966 and spent most of his time splicing inner tubes, which required that he work with large amounts of soapstone, a powder that has asbestos in it.
It would be so thick that you couldn't see down the aisle, down the line that you were running, until it dissipated some. It was that thick. When at the end of the shift, our noses were clogged with the soapstone, that when we took a shower, we got the water in and blew our noses to try and open our noses up so that we could breathe again.
Opplinger says he's short of breath. Dr. Clara Gelbart, a consultant to Stemple, says that's not unusual.
This is a X-ray of a normal individual. There is a significant contrast between this normal lung and the difference between this patient, in which...
Gelbart says the severity of asbestosis depends on how much asbestos is inhaled and for how long. While working on a similar investigative report in Amarillo, Texas, I was briefly exposed to asbestos and decided to be tested to see if my lungs had been affected. My pulmonary lung test was normal. Gelbart says that's expected because there's usually a 10 to 20 year latency period before asbestosis can be diagnosed. But once that diagnosis is made, it's a question of how many years the person has left and the quality of those years.
Because one of their major problems is shortness of breath. And if they wouldn't exert, or they wouldn't do anything, they, may have several years to live, but completely without any quality of life. It would be like vegetating almost.
Squibb has been tested, and he has pleural thickening. He spent most of his 30 years in the plant's mill and tube room, two areas that require large amounts of steam. Stemple had insulation samples from the pipes that carried the steam examined by a New York laboratory. Both have asbestos in amounts of 90% or more. Squibb says the job description used in the early 60s by Firestone states a pipe coverer would be using asbestos insulating material. Despite these findings, Firestone disputes them by saying, Firestone is very concerned about the health of its employees, but we are skeptical about any test results found by Gordon Stemple. Firestone has conducted their own employee health tests and have not found any signs of asbestos-related health problems. But that's not what many workers believe. They're afraid they may be dying.
I don't believe the risks were worth what we went through. I mean, at the time we were young men, and we never figured that when we get older that I guess that these things would affect us.
Workers at the Miami plant are also wondering if their coughing and shortness of breath are traceable to the asbestos found in the pipe covering and the soapstone that they were told was harmless. We'll learn their story tomorrow. Mary Grady, Channel 6.
I'm sure and I'm convinced in my own mind that they did not, on a daily and day-to-day basis and hour-to-hour basis, question in their minds, what's this going to do to me 15, 20 years from now? What you were interested in doing is going in on a daily basis and performing your job.
Rollin would never have guessed he is slowly dying because of his exposure to asbestos, but he is. Rollin worked at the B.F. Goodrich tire plant in Miami for 25 years before he became the local union president. He's working closely with Gordon Stemple, the California attorney handling the Tire Workers Litigation project. The project offers the workers a free screening so they can find out if their lungs are contaminated with asbestos.
In my view, as a conscientious union leader, that if there was compensatory awards because of exposure to asbestos, talc or any other harmful substance to the body that my people had a rightful legal entitlement to and could be gained with the assistance of Stemple and Associates in Los Angeles, California, that I was going to be very fast about trying to gain that assistance for them.
Clifford Whitehead is anxious to be screened. He worked in clouds of soapstone for 20 years. He says during that time, the working conditions were so bad, men would come out of the plant looking like ghosts.
In about 1970, we began to negotiate items to help clear the air, exhaust fans and dust collectors and things like that. So for the next few years then, it began to clear up quite a bit. But up until that time, I guess we really didn't think much about how bad it was.
Clarence Spencer believes the soapstone is causing his breathing problems.
We thought about it and we complained and griped about it, but you go to a company doctor or a nurse and she'd say, well, it won't hurt you. You could eat it for breakfast if you know, it's harmless. It won't hurt you. There's nothing in it to hurt you, so we just believed them through the years.
When asked if they were aware of the documented dangers of soapstone and asbestos, B.F. Goodrich replied, no comment, and went on to say, during the years the plant was open, B.F. Goodrich took stringent safety precautions in their operation. But those safety procedures didn't reach the workers' homes, so there's the argument that their families also could have been contaminated.
My wife has about the same cough I do and everything, and I have been after her. She doesn't go to the doctor, but she said, oh, it's just because I smoke, you know, and you don't. And, you know, and that's where she just lets it go at that, whether she has any effect, whether this has or not, you know.
We certainly expect to find it in the wives and in the children, and we are going to examine them.
Stemple says the lawsuits need to be filed quickly because of legislation pending in Washington that would deny the tire workers the right to sue in court and set a cap on the maximum amount of compensation they can be paid.
The bad news is, yes, in some cases you have an asbestos-related disease. The good news is we found out about it in time to get your lawsuit filed.
But for the worker slowly dying from asbestosis, a cure would matter more than money.
It still doesn't change the impact on the individual. Now, the bottom line is if you receive in the mail one day a letter from some medical people that you trust their judgment, and the second paragraph starts off with, unfortunately, you know what the bottom line is because you feel it.
Mary Grady, Channel 6.